evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Prabha Khetan Foundation, I welcome you for the book release of Lady Kent's book, Dear Mama, by the distinguished Madam Cherie Blair. Lady Kent's is a heart that bleeds for those trapped in lonely islands of poverty and violence amidst great wealth and prosperity of India. A mind that understands the depravity of the buying and selling of human beings. A spirit that stands stubbornly against trafficking of children. A soul that is so steeped in the Indian heritage that all creativity, books, articles, documentaries radiate Indianness. A woman born in India who lives in London and yet seeks a home in different cultures through her multifarious works. Connect these rainbow-colored motley dots together and you get the intoxicating and incandescent sketch of Lady Mohini Kent Noon. Lord Vishnu was the preserver of humanity, and Lady Kent, who bears the name of Vishnu's only female avatar Mohini, has taken on his name as well as his role. She preserves, provides succor, and sustains humankind through her kaleidoscopic capabilities. True to her name, she has been the Mohini and has enchanted all of us through the perfect power of her words, the utter efficacy of her thoughts, and the downright dynamism of her anti-human trafficking projects. Perhaps her ability to soak in the dappled cultural world of books sensitized her, and she diffused the redolence of lily in the exploited lives of human beings that are bought and sold like commodities. She carries with her the Buddhist Zen and the Zen of cooking, not just for the soul, but also for the stomach. Her charismatic creativity has already made the Black Taj more effulgent, the Desi girls more vivacious, and the curry tiffin more succulent. Her new book is a gentle but poignant reminder that our mothers are the source of our being. But in the flow and strife of life, we sometimes fail to connect as often as we want. The chasms caused by the catastrophic COVID are bridged in this compilation of letters from eminent personalities to their mothers, simply titled Dear Mama. We cannot thank you enough for being a role model for the young India by epitomizing the word humane. Thank you for your books. Thank you for Lily. And thank you for lighting up our lives today. With a heart brimming with elation and emotion, I welcome Lady Mohini Kent amidst us and request her to welcome Madam Cherie Blair.
Thank you, Swati. Reminds me of something someone said in London. I feel like I've died and gone to heaven. But it is now my great pleasure to introduce Cherie Blair to our viewers. Now, Cherie Blair has packed in more in one lifetime than I thought was humanly possible. She is a leading international human rights lawyer. She is governor of the London School of Economics, chancellor of the Asian University for Women. She was chancellor of Liverpool University, and they have named the new block after her. And I could go on and on. She is an ardent campaigner for women's equality and the founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women. She is the wife of the former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and mother of 4 children. And honestly, super women don't come any more super than this. And I count myself among her very long legion of admirers.
And friends.
And friends. Very much so, Cherie. And I have written this book, Dear Mama, for Lily Against Human Trafficking. And the theme of the book is same as the theme of the charity, to honor women, all women, wives, daughters, girlfriends, colleagues, workers, to cherish all women just as we cherish our mothers. And the format of the book is an open letter to mother from eminent personalities. When I started the charity about 15 years ago, we named it Lily. And by the way, Cherie, it was Margaret's suggestion, Margaret McDonough, who is a patron of Lily. And we looked for a girl who would symbolize our work. Lily was only 4. She was only a little girl of 4 years when she was sold to a pimp for 5,000 rupees. So I thank you, Cherie. You are a very brave, enterprising, and empowered woman for so spontaneously agreeing to do this event and supporting the cause.
Well, it's my pleasure, Mohini, and delighted to be able to participate in this event with you today. The cause is absolutely vital, and I hadn't known about 4-year-old Lily. It's a heartbreaking story, and I hope now, so many years on, that she has a good life.
Well, since you asked, I was going to talk about this later, but she was rescued after a few months in the brothel. She's now about 25. She grew up in a sheltered home. She's been educated. She's a graduate. When I asked, I sent word, I said, what does she want to do now with her life? She burst into tears and she said, I want to teach mothers to love their children because it was her own mother who had sold her for 5,000 rupees. But she's in a good place. I mean, how you get over a trauma like this, I don't know, but we do our best to help them at least. So Swati, I think maybe we can do the
very heartwarming, Mohini ji. It is our fortune to be amongst two formidable powerhouses, two ladies with passion and purpose, with grit and grace, with sensitivity and substance. I request Madam Cherie Blair to release Lady Kent's book, Dear Mama. It's a defining moment and an exemplary deed, since all the proceeds from this book will be used for philanthropy. Over to you, Madam Cherie Blair.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm afraid I can't. I can show it like this. I'm sorry I can't properly open it in person, but it's an amazing book. I recommend it to anybody. These heartfelt letters from people to their mothers, about their mothers, and it reminds us about the ideal of motherhood and how some do, and in some cases don't, live up to that ideal.
So, Cherie, can I invite you to read a little bit from your letter in the book? And your mother, Gail Booth, I think died recently. Was it 2016?
She did. Yeah. So she was lucky enough to, be with me on a long part of my journey. I was very fortunate to get into my 60s and still have both my parents with me, but sadly now both of them are gone. Yes, and of course I'd be delighted to read a little bit about my mother from the book. It says, "My dear Mum, you were my constant supporter and honest critic, my inspiration, role model, and friend. Your life was not easy. You lost your own mother at the age of 14, which meant you had to leave school to look after your father and younger brother. By the time you were 18, your father had married again, and you left home to become an actress. You met my father, also an actor, and at 21 fell pregnant with me. Though you tried to carry on working, once my sister was born, you had to give it all up and move with your daughters to live with your mother-in-law in Liverpool. My father continued his own acting career in London and only predictably to abandon you after a few years. Thus, you became a single parent, solely responsible for supporting your 2 girls, and had to find work. Besides being the only breadwinner in the family, you were determined that my sister and I would have the education you lacked. I saw you go without so many times, just to ensure, for example, that my sister and I were able to have the right shoes and expensive uniforms demanded by our grammar school. I have tried to pay homage to you, and when in 2008 I established the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, It was because of you. I wanted to help women like you gain the financial independence needed to be able to make their own decisions about their lives and to avoid having their futures decided for them by others. That is the start in life you gave me and also your legacy. With love, Cherie.
That's wonderful. It's a very moving letter, yours. Are there any other letters in the book that particularly moved you that you would like to refer to?
Well, there are a number. I mean, for example, my dear friend Sir Cliff Richard wrote about his mother. And of course, many people don't know, because he's a very famous British singer, that he was brought up in India. And interesting, I thought about his story, about how for his mother coming back from India after partition also led to a complete change of lifestyle and hardship. And we see that too with many of the other people who write in the book, coming from India as immigrants to the United Kingdom, leaving behind perhaps a lifestyle that was much harder to replicate here, and yet their mothers inspiring them and enabling them to go on and build great lives. My friend Surinder Arora tells a story like that, for example, but there are many others in this book, which some of them are funny stories, others are a bit more serious. I like David Schilling, for example. I love the picture in that. Him, because David Schilling's a very famous maker of eccentric hats, and when he went to the palace to get his award from the Queen, his mother is there with him in the book, wearing a hat with what looks like a slice of cheese and a mouse on it. So that's quite a funny and endearing image to see. And so I'm delighted to that. I also love that Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, another friend of mine, wrote a poem to her mum, celebrating the fact that she says in the beginning, "My mother ain't no ordinary mother." You know, I think for most of us who are lucky enough to have caring mothers, there's no such thing as an ordinary mother. Everyone's caring mother is an extraordinary mother.
Yes, that's when the idea of the book came to me, it grew out of my work with women. And I thought the most direct way was to write a letter to mother, because it's a very unique relationship. And the honesty of the letters and the love that comes through in the letters is, because I think it's very difficult to fudge this relationship. If you had to write to your brother or some other member of the family, it
Your
would
husband.
be your husband. I think that would be, a very different sort of letter if it was honest in the first place. So
But what is nice, though, is that there's a lot of men writing to their mothers too. And often in the work that I do, and we talk about working with women, and we know that the disadvantages that women suffer in the world, even today, and the COVID has made that worse. But, we have to remember that not all men are our enemies by any means, and that many men respect women precisely because of the love that they have for their own mothers and the inspiration that she has been to them. And you have many examples of that in your book, and it's a good message.
No, you're right. In fact, you'll be surprised. Some of them actually, Mr. K.P. Singh, from whom I just got an email today, Lord Paul, to name two, Surinder, they thanked me for this opportunity to express what they felt about their mother. And it's funny because they hadn't shared so much of this with their own families. And so it gave, except that, I got letters which were sort of 4,000 words long, where I wanted 400 words.
That was the hardest bit, actually.
So It sounds like a very easy idea, ask people for letters and write this book, but it's the most difficult book I've done to date. It's my fifth book. It took over 2 years. And it was, even getting the letters with the best will in the world. Sometimes it took a year. Then it took another 6 months to get a photograph. Then that didn't work. Then I got these letters, which were sort of 4,000 words long. I had to sit and edit them and rewrite them. But I'm very pleased with the, the look and the feel and the content of the book. And then, of course, there are the letters from the girls, the victims, and they were not so lucky to have, privileged upbringing. And their letters are very different in tone, as you know, Cherie. But they speak of heartbreak and pain and trauma. And I can share some 2 or 3 stories with you, because the book is for the Lily charity and for the girls. And their names have all been changed. This is mandatory. And we can't use images, we can't use names, so all that is there. But, for example, this one girl, Habiba, she was the 3rd daughter born to a family in Benares, and they didn't want her. Nobody loved her, nobody wanted her. So they got her married at the age of 13 to a 40-year-old man who raped her. And she's written that he treated her like an animal. 1 year later, he was dead. She was pregnant. She had a boy. She named him Anwar, and there was nowhere to go. So she ended up at the Benares railway station. And I, found in the course of this work, because we do at Lily, we do focus on children in brothels and children being trafficked, that railway station, bus stand, these are very hubs for pickup. And, they're called spotters in Nepal, they're called traffickers. And so a woman befriended her and said, I'll get you a job in Delhi. Brought her to Delhi, sold her to a brothel. She was only about 14 or maybe going on to 15. She was rescued some years later, and she naturally wanted to find out what happened to her son. He had been sold separately, the baby. And now 5 years had gone by. Our project tracked him down. She had a very impossible choice to make, to take him back or to leave him where he was. And she opted to leave him with that family because she's had nothing to offer him. So, these are the kind of stories which are really very distressing, but they're happening to girls just like us. And, girls have dreams. When they grow up, they want to become this, that, and the other. I think the earlier dreams were about white horses and handsome princes, but now the dreams are about piloting planes and fighting in wars and being astronauts and being prime ministers. But these girls have never been allowed a dream because they were so small. Some were, the Lily was 4, then there was a 6-year-old, there's a 10-year-old, there are 12-year-olds. And they have, they've been living with this life in hell. So the book is for them. The sales are going to go to the charity. And I don't know, Cherie, your project, your Foundation for Women actually works more with women in business, and you work in a number of countries. What is your sense about how far the Women's Project has proceeded, and what really are we looking at now?
Well, for sure. I mean, and we work around the issue of women's economic empowerment precisely because of that story I told of my own mother, because she didn't have the education or the means to support herself. And she did, but it was a struggle. And so, it was a big struggle. And so I very much from an early age realized that if a woman has the ability to make her own living, then it allows her to make choices about the future and not have choices made for her. And you see that in the stories you're telling about the girls that you work with, who have these choices made for them, and their lives then set in a trajectory which is leading to a fate that is not at all what their dreams would have wished for. And to be fair, their parents and their mothers too may have also had that trajectory and not been able to make the choices. I don't think most mothers would willingly sell their daughters into slavery, and particularly into prostitution. But who knows? Some people might. But the whole issue about, yes, we have had progress for women. I mean, look, we've just seen a woman elected vice president of the United States. And what's interesting is the World Economic Forum every year since 2006 has published the Global Gender Gap Report, showing what progress has been for women in education, health, politics, and economic development. But unfortunately, last year, just the end of last year, before COVID, that report showed that in one area, progress had not only stopped, but actually gone back. And I'm afraid that area was women's economic empowerment. And the progress in that, they were projecting that equal opportunities for men and women in the economic sphere was going to take 255 years. And the year before, it had only been 212 only. So, which is, as you mentioned, I've got 4 children, but I've also now got 5 grandchildren. And the idea that my granddaughters might have to wait to have that is not acceptable to me. And the reality is as well that COVID, and I mentioned this already, has impacted in an economic way much more on women than on men. It seems as though men in the health types, men are perhaps more vulnerable to COVID. But if you look at the economic impact, because women, first of all, have those who are working have to shoulder the double burdens of working from home without the support that you would normally have, because normally if you are working, you have arrangements for your children, arrangements for your household duties, and all of that has collapsed. And on the other hand, you also see women have been working in the front line because the caring professionals, the people we don't often think about, but the people who give that basic care to the vulnerable, to the ill, women have been affected by that. And the recent research from the UN, which was published a few weeks ago, says that by this time next year, 435 million women and girls will be living on less than $1.90 a day worldwide, which is the extreme poverty line. And 47 million of those would have been specifically impoverished by COVID-19. So we're seeing a huge impact on the economic impact on women and girls by COVID. And so my foundation, we act to help women, give women the information and training, the support networks and the mentoring that they need to be able to set up and grow their own businesses. Some businesses are small businesses running from home, which provide subsistence for their family. Others are businesses that actually can grow and expand and provide jobs, not just for family members, but for many other people. Again, even fortunate women in the economic sphere are disadvantaged in compared to men. If you look at women trying to raise finance, women being taken seriously, we did some surveys amongst our women, and so many of them were told, women can't do business, or, well, women don't know how to manage money, something I find extraordinary given that most women manage their households. These assumptions, or, what does your husband say about this? It's not, why aren't you, your job is to be in the home. These things do hold women back. And so we work with women to give them the confidence, to give them the skills, and to give them the network and support that they need. And during COVID, it's been even more important that we help them pivot their businesses so that they can still continue, helping them go online, helping them find new markets, helping them do new ways of getting in touch with their customers. In India, for example, we have one of our women we've been working called Medha. She was doing an organic clothing line, and that was doing very well. But obviously, the country in lockdown, she couldn't sell her clothes face to face anymore, as she used to do in markets. So we've helped her transition her business online, and also she's obviously started to make masks, which is a way, sending to the customers in the post, which is a way to keep her income going. But we have all sorts of different women, from women that I met in Delhi who, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, a woman who runs a daycare center for the elderly, something which hasn't been very common in India, but is more common now that more women are working and families are spreading around more, or women who, for example, organic skin products. One of our women that we work with has a factory that makes those. To women in the rural areas who are much more about subsistence, including one amazing woman I met out near Pune when I went to visit, who had worked in a shop and had had her left hand cut off in an accident with a cutting machine. And she went on to our program and was able to start a new business again. And I remember visiting her shop, and she, with one hand, was wrapping up the rice that she was selling in these almost like origami-like parcels. And then she said, "Would you like to have a go?" I have two hands. And I can tell you that my attempts to do that were pathetic in comparison. But when I asked her about her day, you know, she got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. She milked the 10 cows. I said, "Couldn't your husband help with that?" She said, no, he's far too clumsy. She'd then go home, make breakfast for everybody, get her children off to school. She'd then go and work in the shop from until 5 o'clock in the evening. She'd then go and milk her cows again. And then she'd come home and late and prepare dinner. And, you know, she would go to bed at around 10 o'clock at night. And that was her life. And her greatest ambition was to make sure that her daughter, who was still at 16 at school, could become a doctor. That was what her ambition was. So there's an amazing example of again, a mother's selfless love for her family and for her children.
Well, I must tell you that education is a very strong part of our Lily charity, because it's a prevention. We don't want this to happen in the first place. And we support free schools for example, in South India near Bangalore, where it's a community called Lambadias, which were traditionally supposed to be thieves and beggars and looters and all people. They were considered very dangerous. But those children, they're first generation children in education. And there are a lot of girls and boys equally. And some of them have started little businesses in Bangalore because the school has been going for some time. Another school that we've been supporting is in Rajasthan, in this another tribal area, the Bhedia tribe, which has a very peculiar custom of putting their daughters into the flesh trade at puberty. And they had nothing, the girls had nothing to go to or to support them until this school came up. And I'll just tell you a couple of stories. One girl, she was being coerced to go to Delhi's GB Road, where her sister was already a practicing prostitute. And she resisted, and her mother supported her. Now, very sadly, is the fathers and brothers and all who push these girls and then live off the earnings. I mean, it's a very bizarre tradition they built up. And there was a lot of violence or abuse and all that. But because she came and took shelter in the school and her mother, so we supported her. She went to school. She didn't go into the flesh trade. She passed out from the school. She got married and she's leading her own life. And some of them, the women, of course, are much older, and this had already happened to them. One of the once young girl from this area had been sent to Bihar. She had 4 children in a brothel, and she was determined that her daughters would not follow her. So she sent them back to this school. Now, one of the girls got married and went off somewhere else to some other city, but one stayed on. So she not only finished school, she became part of the self-help group of women. She got married. She took a loan, set up a husband in business in, I think, auto rickshaw, paid off the loan. Then she took another loan, started a shop in the village, paid off that loan. Then she took a loan, built a house. She's now in her mid 40s. But I think the most amazing thing, what she also did was to rescue her mother. And she brought her mother to live with her in her old age and gave her that peace and comfort. So, you know, that's how far girls can go, or boys too, from deprived backgrounds of illiteracy if they get some support.
For sure. And look at the resilience. I mean, you know, this is not, we shouldn't be sad. We should be amazed at the resilience of women and the way that when life throws things at them, they literally pick themselves up and do something, often for themselves and their children. And the stories in the book show that time and time again, the stories that you're telling. So, you know, think of what the world would be like if only we could harness that, if only women were given the equal chances with men to contribute to the economy, to put their ideas into action, to have the choices that are more available to men than women. And, you know, my foundation did a survey with the BCG, what the one of the big companies, and we saw that actually $5 trillion could be added to global GDP if women were given equal opportunities to men to participate in the economy. You know, these women are not asking for handouts. What they want is the opportunity to shape their own future and the dignity of making their own decisions. And if we enable that, if we harness that power, amazing things can happen, which is why I still remain an optimist. And we have made progress, yes. We still have a lot to do, but we need to do more. And education is not, it is vital, but it's not enough, because in India, for example, you have many, to want a term, middle-class girls who get an education, but then at the end of the day are prevented by societal norms from actually going into the workforce. So you have your female graduates have a sort of participation in the economy of below 30%. Look at Bangladesh, much poorer country, and you look at the participation of their female graduates, and it's over 50%, over 60%. And so part of this is about societal norms that have views about what is suitable for daughters, which isn't only about poor girls. It's actually about girls across society, and that too needs to change. That's one of the interesting things I found working with Indian women in my foundation. You know, many of whom have been frustrated by the expectation. I think of one woman that we work with again in Delhi, who's on our mentoring platform, and she was a journalist, and she said that she'd realized that the men she was working with were investing their money. But as far as everyone was concerned, she as a woman, her money was basically for shoes and handbags, you know, and she wanted to learn a bit more about how to invest her money to make it more productive. And so she ended up leaving journalism, taking a course, learning about that. And now she has a business, which is a series of workshops and trainings for women in a number of cities, where she teaches them about financial literacy and teaches them about how they can also spend their money on something that is more productive, perhaps, than shoes and handbags. Not that I am not guilty of having many shoes and handbags myself.
How many do you have? Have you ever counted them?
You know, I have far too many, most of which I don't wear anymore, not least because these days, frankly, I've gone off heels. So I go for comfort, and I can hardly believe that I used to get my feet in, you know, these high heels. But that's a different story. But the point about, you know, this isn't just about very poor girls. There is an assumption about what women can and cannot do, which affects every one of us, which is why I believe that as long as there are these prejudices against women anywhere, none of us, however fortunate we are as women, will be totally free.
I completely agree with you. I was brought up in India, but I mean, I was born here. I was born in Amritsar, but I've lived in London since the age of 21. And you think that, you know, I wouldn't be very Indian in my attitudes, but the fact is, it's so ingrained, the culture and the attitudes. It's very hard to get it out. And at least, you know, my mother was most unusually liberal, and she had no class consciousness in what is based essentially a very feudal society in India. But still, the attitudes about, you know, the interaction of men and women, the control of money, which is generally in the hands of the man of the house. And I find this even amongst very privileged women, that really they have nothing in their hands. They lead gilded lives. But to me, they're golden cages because there's no freedom there. I value my freedom. And so I think the attitude of the women and the attitude of the men, and since this is an Indian forum, I'll just say a little bit. I think the Indian culture has been very unfair to women. And it's bizarre because on the one hand, we have this image of empowerment in Durga, who was created as a warrior goddess when the male gods had failed to win the battle. And on the other hand, culturally, it varies from north to south very differently. You know, Kerala was a matriarchal society, so there were different attitudes. Punjab, Haryana are very patriarchal. I'm a Sikh, so I was born in Amritsar. But it's the mindset of women as much as men that has to change, because we fall into this mindset no matter where we are and how well, or you know, how educated or how outgoing one is. So that's a very fundamental problem. But I think you mentioned why Lily's mother had sold her. She was a prostitute. And in the course of this work, I found that they all have a drink and drugs habit because they cannot tolerate their sordid lives otherwise. All of them. They're given it by the madams and the pimps when they arrive just to get them. Yeah, just to dope them, and then they get addicted, and that becomes a central focus of their life. So that is, you know, unfortunate part. But just coming back to some of the letters, because again, this is a cultural thing. If you see that, you know, the Indian men, they revere their mothers, and yet they can treat wives quite badly and quite be very dominant and abusive also. And the abuse can take many forms. It can be financial abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and sometimes physical. So,
yeah, the mother-in-law is a big feature. More of a feature in Indian culture than in some other cultures, I think. But, you know, cultures can be changed. And we have to remember that culture is only the practices of the people, and the practices of the people do change over time. I was thinking of actually Lord Lumber in your book, and you know what he says about his mother, who of course was a widow, and how he was very affected by that and was determined to do something about it. So much so that he set up the Lumber Foundation, which actually works with poor widows across the world, because widowhood is an issue not just in India, but it is a big issue still in India.
I think Maureen Lipman's also written about that, because her mother found it very awkward. She used to go to Wolseley and they tell her the table for two was reserved and not available. And she felt because she was a widow and she was a pensioner and she was on her own, you know, she was invisible.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not, I was going to say, it's not just by any means an Indian or an Asian problem. This issue of widowhood is across the world, but there are particular practices and cultures where it is perhaps more intense than others, and India is certainly one of them.
I think rules and laws can be outdated, they are fossilized, they have to be changed. there is a turning point. And who knows, maybe this pandemic is a turning point and we might emerge into a different set of circumstances and rules. I'm not sure if the world will go back to exactly what it was, but I think it's time for a change.
Well, I think you're right about that. I also think that what this pandemic has shown us is the importance of these caring roles, often low paid, disregarded, and yet we have seen, haven't we, how without people providing these services, how easy it is for our economy to collapse, because these are vital tasks. You know, caring is a vital task. The fact that it's mainly done by women has often led it to be devalued, but without it, others cannot work. You know, without the people that help us by looking after our children, by teaching our children, you know, by doing our housework so that we can do some often, well, usually more lucrative work for sure. You know, this is why the pandemic has affected so many women badly, because they've relied on these things and suddenly they haven't had them available. And I think if it makes us value caring more, if it makes it understand that these things, you know, do have an economic impact, do have an economic contribution to be made, then something good has come out of the pandemic. And also, of course, actually, I do think more people have realized with technology that working from home is something I wouldn't espouse to work only from home. I think you still need that contact, but nevertheless, flexible working, I think, has become much more acceptable. It's really accelerated that, and I think that is particularly liberating for women. So in fact, it's also liberating for many men who don't have to endure long and debilitating commutes.
Yeah. But I think, you know, again, what you say about the caring role, because some of these letters in the book also reflect the nurture of the mother, and which, I mean, Sharmila Tagore, who is an ambassador of Lily Charity, she says, the day I became a mother, I understand you so much better. And I realize I have taken you for granted, because we take our mothers for granted.
We do.
We, you know, and I think, of course, society is changing, but earlier wives were taken for granted. They ran the house, they ran everything smoothly, easily, children were taken care of, and there was no price put on it, and there was no, you know,
value put on it, actually.
Not value, no spoken appreciation. And so, you know, this, and then mothers have also, of course, it's a great standard of unconditional love, because they do sacrifice themselves and their own opportunities sometimes for their children, and forgive. So all these, I think we are going back to a slightly more feminine values, more nurturing, caring roles that women have always played without recognition. And Sri M, the spiritual guru who had secretly left home at the age of 19 in Kerala, he was missing for 4 years. His mother didn't know whether he was dead or alive. And when he returned, he said that his letters in the book, and he said she welcomed me back without a word of protest or wandering yogi. Only a mother can do that. So the standards and maybe the role models and all will slightly change. And this book is written by me to help all these children who need an opportunity. And, you know, I urge everyone to buy a copy, help Lily. And I don't know if there are any questions coming up. Anandita, are you there, or Swati? I've been...
Yes.
Yeah, Mohini, there are questions. If you see a question, you can take question from Apra Kuchal. There on the chat box, there are a few questions which you can see.
I don't think it's visible to me.
Swati, can you read out the questions?
Yes, sure. So we have one question from Apra Kuchal, who asks, women are typically employed at the last end of the value chain or occupational chain and bereft of any social security and in survivalist state rather than growing. What are your views on the same?
Well, I think we've been discussing just that women have not been valued. And Cherie, I remember one anecdote when they were in your early days, when there were opportunities for the chamber to take on one person, and they opted. Maybe you can talk about that, and that answers the question and also shows how things have changed today.
Well, that is certainly true. When I told you a bit about my background, so I turned out to be quite a clever girl, and so I ended up at university, and then I ended up coming top of the bar finals in England and Wales. So I was the top student, but then having been encouraged by my mother and indeed the nuns to think that, as long as you worked hard, then you could achieve your vision, I came up with the hard reality that there was a big problem. And the problem was that I was female. And in those days, only 10% of the barristers were female. And so there were fewer role models. And many chambers would say, we don't take women because the clients don't like women. The textbook at the time said women are not good advocates because their voices don't carry. Anyway, I managed to find a place to give me my pupillage, which is a year's training you have to do. And at the end of that, they said to me, look, Cherie, there's only one place here, and one's a boy and one's a girl going for this job. So obviously, we have to give it to the boy. And that's despite the fact that even the boy admitted that I was the better lawyer. And that boy actually was Tony Blair. So as you know, I married him. And the irony is I went off, and here I am 40 odd years later, still a lawyer. And Tony Blair abandoned the law after 7 years and went and did something else. So the assumption that the man was the better bet because he would be the one who would continue to be the lawyer was based on not based on a reality at all. But I think today my daughter's a barrister, and in her class, over 50% of them were women. We're seeing a lot more women into the legal profession. We're still not seeing them. It's the glass ceiling again. Women drop out, particularly around, my daughter's just had a baby. It's around the challenges of work-life balance once you become a parent. But I see from my own sons, one of whom is also a lawyer, that younger men today, certainly in the UK, are much more interested in not being distant father figures, but participating more and taking a share of those responsibilities. Now, the reality is, as the research shows, that share that they think they're doing 50-50 isn't actually 50-50, but it's certainly better than their fathers did. And I noticed a lot of the questions in the boxes are about the role of men too, and the relationship between fathers and daughters, fathers and sons. And I think we have to stop thinking about it as fathers having a different role from mothers and start thinking about what it is to be a parent and how it's a joint enterprise to bring up the next generation, and to concentrate on the particular skills and aptitudes that both parents bring to a relationship so that each of them can have that amazing love and fulfillment that you do get from being a parent, for sure.
But I think it's also about earning money, and women are earning more. I went to art school in London, and I used to take this very long bus ride. And I remember the graffiti on the wall of Nat West Bank. It said, economy is the secret police of our senses. Money talks, people mumble. Now, it's the person who also controls the money in the family, which is now being diffused. I don't know. Do you think that role of the breadwinner and the earner, because it's also shifted to women, is that quite central to the change?
Well, I think we have to be careful about the different cultures and the different experiences, but certainly in the West, certainly in the US and in Western Europe, the fact is, we have organized for a long time our workplace on this idea that men go out to work and don't have to worry about anything in relation to the rest of their life because it's done by women in the home. Now, that was something, you know, and some people still talk about the return to the heyday of the 50s when this happened. But the reality is, as I know, because certainly in the early 60s, when after my dad abandoned my mother, that wasn't the model for my family. My father didn't provide for us at all. It was my mother who provided for us and went out to work to do that. And it's certainly not the case since really going on from the 1980s, and certainly now in the 21st century, so many families these days from economic necessity are dual income families. And you can no longer carry on organizing the world of work as though, you know, everybody has a wife at home taking care of everything else. And therefore what one sees, and I see it with my own children, you know, who are in dual income families, a renegotiation and an understanding that that culture has to change in the economic interest of the families, and that each partner has to contribute in a way that works for them and play their part. Because in the end, you know, this is not just about money, is it? It's also about making sure that we nurture and bring up the next generation. And if we don't do that properly, then no economy is going to thrive. And so it's very, very important for all of us, whether we have children or not, to ensure that you know, we do this right. Not least because in many places, take Japan, women are actually, I wouldn't say voting with their feet, but voting in one way, and they're not getting married or not having children, and they have a declining population as a result. You know, we want to encourage the next generation. We want to encourage good family life, and that requires an understanding that everyone has to contribute to make that happen.
But it's also about happiness and fulfillment, and women feeling fulfilled, and, you know, families feeling fulfilled without a sense of frustration in the equation.
I think that's why I said we do a lot around confidence, because so many of the women we work with have basically been told that they're not worth as much.
Yeah.
And that there's, you know, so much about what they can't do. And that in turn, you know, or what they should do. And so it's very important that women understand their beliefs, they understand their strengths and have the belief in themselves.
I think it's very subliminal. I mean, in my own case, I was born a Sikh and I was brought up by my grandmother, was a very doughty woman. Sikh women have had equality in the faith since the beginning. They were, you know, they've been initiated as priests from the beginning of Sikhism. They even were warriors and they went to war. And yet the sort of larger Indian culture creates this sense of subordination unconsciously. So it's very hard to overcome.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But, you know, I keep saying cultures change. And actually part of the reason cultures change is from economic necessity. And the reality, that's why we've seen as economic necessity has put women into the workforce and progress. But, you know, once upon a time, women, you know, I look back, I remember my grandmother physically washing the clothes in the sink with a mangle. Yeah, I can remember the day they got a twin tub. You know, these practical things that do what otherwise is long and laborious housework have made a difference. It's freed up time. Of course, education has freed up women's brains. Contraception has freed up women to make choices about when and how spaced out they should have their children. All of these things have contributed. And because of that, culture has shifted. Certainly in the high-income countries. And now we need to make sure that in the low and middle-income countries, in the emerging markets, that it doesn't take as long and they don't have to make the same mistakes as we have made going on this journey to bring more freedom for women, and that we can accelerate that process to the benefit of the entire world economy.
I dare not look at the questions because the last time I did, I lost the Zoom call and had to come back again. So I think we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. I don't, I just.
Ma'am, we can take one more question. Swati, can
Yeah.
you read out one question from the Q&A box? Any one
Sure.
question?
Sure. So we have a question which says, women who fight so much for their children don't fight the same way for themselves. And is it the same worldwide, or it's just an Indian phenomena?
No, I think it is the same. Well, but it's partly, of course, again, about all that social conditioning we've been told. You know, it's more acceptable to fight for your children than it is for yourself. It's also partly because women who've experienced the blocks that they haven't wanted that for their children and have been determined to do more about that. You know, I talked about my own mother and the fact that she wasn't able to finish her education because her mother died and her father just said, "I'm sorry, you've got to look after us now." And her desire to make sure that we didn't have that freedom that education's given you denied us. You know, sometimes people say your mum must be so proud of what you've achieved, and I often say, but I think about what she could have achieved, what my grandma could have achieved if they'd had my opportunities, because it doesn't just come from me, this, does it? It's come from them too.
I just want to add, I think it's also a little bit of an evolutionary process because the evolution always moves forward. Every mother and every parent wants their child to be better. Children are a mother's gift to the earth, and evolution is always developing. This is the 21st century. So I think we can expect things to be brighter, more free, more opportunities, and we have to work towards it. Cherie, would you like to sum up? I think we're almost out of time.
I would sum up by saying this, as for all of us on this call, men and women, I think we can be optimistic that for the reasons we've identified, things are changing and we can play our part to help that accelerate. But never forget that in the end, what makes us the human beings we are is those caring and loving relationships. And those of us fortunate to experience them in our own lives need to reach out and have the understanding for those like the girls that the Lily support who haven't had those experiences, and to understand that you know, these girls are not at fault for that, and we need to do something to help them so that they can redefine their future and break out of a cycle of poverty and exploitation.
Well, that's a very important point because it's a point of interdependence. We are all interdependent and we all depend on each other. We've also here because we've received help from so many. It's really incumbent on us to do something, to give a helping hand, because as Cherie said, none of us is free until we are all free.
So well said, Madam Cherie. Blair. Mountains do not rise without earthquakes. So every time I meet a strong person, I want to ask, what struggles have you seen? What hurdles have you vanquished? We are blessed that these two glorious women have shared their stories with us. Stimulating, stirring, inspiring, and all of us need to fight our demons within and without and emerge taller, fiercer, and deeper. Yes, there is a seamy side to all societies. We are all appalled at injustice. But it takes a Mohini Kent to infuse and enthuse everyone to save humanity. We all want equality, but it takes a Cherie Blair to sound the trumpet, call for parity in wages for all genders. I'm grateful to these two ladies for gracing this evening. I'm thankful to them for giving us a peek into the meaningful compilation of Dear Mama. But most importantly, I'm gratified for fueling our spirits. Let's hope another revolution comes out from this magnificent sharing of experiences. Thank you. Stay safe and don't forget to tell your mama how much you love her. I've got my dose of love from my mama and a copy of this treasure. I reckon you get yours. The Flipkart link you see in the chat box is where you can click and get your copy. Thank you so much, Madam Cherie, Blair. Thank you, Lady Kent. What an honor to have you, and what an epic session with these formidable women. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Prabha
you. Thank
Khaitan
you very
Foundation.
much.